can move on to question number 5. This is relating to planning obligations. We've already discussed it a bit earlier. Should the City Council require planning obligations to fund decentralised energy generation on other sites, expansion of existing energy networks, including linking to existing buildings, ongoing energy network management elsewhere in the borough, offsite renewable energy generation and/or renewable energy elsewhere in the borough, or energy efficiency measures in existing properties, or anything else anybody wants to put forward?
I'd make a strong plea for the last bullet point. It has been repeatedly said, very large parts of Westminster are conservation areas. There are a very high density of listed buildings. These are buildings that it's going to be quite difficult to adapt in any really fundamental and thoroughgoing way, and therefore, and yet, in Soho, Covent Garden, Mayfair, you can go around, you just look up. Most of the buildings are still single glazed. I very much doubt that they've got any real forms of insulation and so on. So energy efficiency measures, I suspect, pound for carbon saved, would be the strongest measure that you could press for.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely agree that retrofitting is the way forward to save carbon, but I just question in the context of sort of Circular 505, and these are realities which you'll face if you bring these policies in. How can you make the link between a planning application, for example, coming forward in Paddington Basin or Tottenham Court Road Opportunity Area to retrofit a poorly performing building in Pimlico using the 5 tests? It's very, very difficult to achieve.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, the former speaker, the speaker before that, mentioned conservation areas and listed buildings. Well, many of the terraced houses have fitted, 19th century terraced houses have built-in shutters. The SPAB has found that using the built-in shutters, which can be insulated, and using a curtain as well, gives you a something like a 50% reduction in heat loss without resorting to double glazing or secondary glazing. I think the research was done in Scotland. They quoted the Scottish Scottish Heritage, I suppose, who give the exact figures for that. So I think if you work with the buildings and if you retain the original plaster, Larsen plaster, which is quite thick and which has excellent insulating properties, you can start and work from there, and they're not an entirely lost cause.
Okay, thank you.
I think 5 points are really good. The one I would add is behavioural measures. So just get some people who can talk about energy and get people try and make it exciting. I don't know how. Maybe talk about pounds saved or something like that. Just get people a bit vibrant. And the other way is smart metering. Is somehow just having a smart meter and people being aware of how much energy they use and what the cost implications of the energy they use is a really good way of doing that, and maybe rolling that out before the legislation comes into effect in 2020, push back to 2030. That would be my suggestion.
Great, thank you.
Just on behaviours, we shouldn't lose sight of the carbon reduction commitment, which is going to have a quite significant impact on larger organisations and their obligation to reduce energy or increase energy efficiency or pay for the carbon.
Okay, thank you. Okay, was there any other comments on that? Or any other comments on anything? We've reached the end of our questions. And
Well, I come from a developer and architect background, and what I'm concerned about, particularly in the market that we're in, which is affordable housing or key worker housing, that all these measures are actually adding further and further tax burdens to people who barely can afford them as well. And we're going to end up with, in Westminster, if we continue down this route, a bipolar borough where you have people who are wealthy enough to actually afford to live here and the rest who are basically on state benefits. And I think that it needs to be an appropriate level applied to different sectors rather than a blanket policy based on all developments.
okay, thank you.
So, just a final point on code for sustainable homes, particularly. I've seen various examples whereby if certain credits can't be achieved, for example, energy, say only code level 4 can't be achieved, the developer then assumes that code level 4 will be the credits for everything. I just wondered if Westminster maybe considered a sort of matrix system whereby the developer achieves, maybe if he can only achieve code level 4 in energy, he still has to demonstrate that code level 6 is achievable in everything else unless he can prove otherwise, as with the energy. So just because he can only achieve code level 4 overall, it should be a system whereby you can achieve 6 for water, pollution and all the rest of them.
Okay, thank you. Right, were there any other points anyone wanted to raise? Yes, the gentleman here.
There's a big question about food. I think there's a sort of big design for a food bridge. I can't remember which bridge it was, but the presence of food growing areas is. It sounds like a bit of a wacky idea, but looking at food within Westminster, and if there is possibility of expanding space for food growing, would be great if it was possible to include in the LDF.
I think certainly it's come up at some of the other meetings as well. Thank you.
I'm all for growing. I think I'm all for growing for food, and do have, I think, one of the longer kitchen gardens on Marble Arch. I think it's 25 years I've been doing this now. But as I was feeding a blueberry into my grandchild, the mother said, "Why are you poisoning my child? Anything grown within 25 miles of Marble Arch is lead poisoned." So I'm not sure I would go overboard on actually growing edible things unless the medical practitioners are happy to balance this in some way.
Okay, thank you.
I know this is probably out of the planning jurisdiction, but it appears to me that we're asking probably the smallest enterprise to pick up the tab for the rest of the borough, and there seems to be an imbalance, and I think this comes to the final point on question 5, is it always seems to be down to developers or new developments to do something when the biggest burden is actually not from that. I mean, as a developer, we do try and extend as far as we possibly can to achieve code level 3 or 4 at some considerable cost to the end purchaser, and obviously we have concerns about ongoing costs, sustaining those ongoing costs. But actually the biggest burden is infrastructure, and we've got a policy now where we've got trains going through with air conditioning on them through this borough, which isn't legislated by this borough, and there's all sorts of things that are infrastructural which would make a far greater impact than purely leaving the burden on the developer or new developments.
Thank you. This gentleman back.
Just a couple of last points. I think as developers, doing a planning permission nowadays is extremely expensive because we're being asked for more and more and more information. What we would plea for is that if you want to start introducing that you have to prove what your BREEAM rating is going to be for any building or any development and how energy efficient it is and how carbon neutral is, that you do that by a Grampian measure, Grampian condition, rather than us proving everything, spending an absolute fortune with consultants, etc., producing this information to then get refused by committee because they don't like the look of the building. So that's the first thing. The second thing is district heating systems may be a good idea. We're going to have a fairly big district tunnel being put through central Westminster fairly shortly, e.g. Crossrail. Shouldn't there be some way of someone saying, hang on a minute, you're putting a nice big tunnel straight through Westminster, let's put a few bits of pipework around the side that someone, perhaps not now, but in the future might want to attach to.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not absolutely convinced at the moment that the council are willing to take on board the idea of life cycle analysis and embodied energy. I really hope you do. I've got a feeling that the government's carbon budgets are going to need to tighten up quite considerably. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, thank you very much.
Yeah, just before everyone goes, I just want to say thank you so much for coming. I hope you found it helpful. I know I certainly have. I'm led to believe this was the most productive workshop that we've had yet, because so many people here are actually contributing. So thank you so much for giving us all your views. As I said at the start, they'll be taken away. We'll consider everything that's been said. But if you do have any further representations that you want to make, please just get in touch with the council. This isn't it. Please keep going away, thinking about it, and give us any more comments that you have. But thank you so much for coming, and I'm sure I'll see a lot of you again at another workshop.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'd just add that please don't expect us to get back to you before September. I've been saying this at all the workshops. We've got 11 of these, and then we're going to have a summer break. So we'll get back to you sometime after September. Thank you very much.
I know, sorry, what's that about?